Have you ever felt that deep revolt when seeing a narcissist destroying lives around them, manipulating, lying, causing pain without any remorse, and apparently getting away with everything? That feeling of injustice that burns inside when you see that toxic person prospering while their victims suffer in silence. I understand that pain perfectly. I've been through it. And today, I want to share with you a powerful truth that will completely transform your perspective on God's justice. There is a specific moment when God simply doesn't tolerate narcissistic behavior anymore. An exact point where divine patience runs out and celestial justice takes action in a devastating way for those who chose the path of manipulation and selfishness. What you're going to discover in the next few minutes will shake your convictions about how God deals with toxic people. We're going to dive into the most disturbing story in the Bible about a narcissist who thought she could challenge the Creator himself. Prepare yourself to understand the unmistakable signs of when God is about to apply his divine justice in a narcissist's life, and most importantly, how this will directly impact your life and your emotional healing process. This isn't just another conversation about narcissism. It's about the divine revenge you've been waiting for so long. In the Bible, there exists a woman who perfectly personifies destructive narcissism in its most cruel and calculating form. Her name was Jezebel, and her story will make you immediately recognize the narcissist who is destroying your peace. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess who married Ahab, king of Israel. Externally, she projected charm, beauty, and even played the victim when it suited her. Exactly like narcissists do today. They come into your life with a perfect mask, gaining your trust, making you believe they are everything you always needed. But behind that enchanting facade, Jezebel was a cold and calculating manipulator. She promoted the worship of false gods, persecuted innocent people, and went so far as to murder Naboth just because her husband wanted the man's vineyard. Imagine the cruelty, eliminating a human life for pure whim and greed. This is the essence of the narcissist. They are capable of destroying anyone who stands in the way of what they desire. It doesn't matter if it's your spouse, your children, your friends, or work colleagues. To them, you are just a disposable object. Jezebel controlled through fear, intimidation, and emotional manipulation. She knew exactly which buttons to press to get what she wanted. And when someone dared to confront her or expose her true nature, her fury was relentless. The prophet Elijah experienced this firsthand. After publicly humiliating the false prophets that Jezebel supported, she sent a threatening message saying she would kill him in the same brutal way he had eliminated her followers. This is the typical reaction of the narcissist when they are exposed: merciless revenge. They can't handle the truth about who they really are, so they go on the attack to destroy. But here's what Jezebel didn't know. God was watching her every move. Every lie, every manipulation, every life destroyed was being recorded in the divine tribunal. By the way, what city are you watching me from right now? Leave it in the comments. I love knowing where our community that seeks truth comes from. And what God did to Jezebel will completely shock you. Before applying his devastating justice, God always sends clear warning signs. It's as if he gives multiple opportunities for the person to change their behavior before definitively closing the door of mercy. With Jezebel, it was no different. God sent the prophet Elijah several times to confront her with the truth. Every miracle, every demonstration of divine power was a clear warning. Stop this madness before it's too late. The same happens with the narcissist in your life today. God is not sleeping nor ignoring the suffering that person is causing. He sends constant warnings through situations, people, and even through the narcissist's own conscience. You can observe these divine signs in the narcissist's life. Relationships that fall apart one after another. Opportunities lost inexplicably. Problems that arise out of nowhere. people who begin to see through their mask. It's as if God were gradually removing all sources of narcissistic supply from that person. Friends begin to distance themselves. Family loses patience. Professional opportunities mysteriously close. But here's the problem. The narcissist rarely heeds these warnings. Arrogance and pride are like a blindfold that prevents them from seeing reality. They interpret every negative consequence as persecution or envy from others. Jezebel did exactly this. Instead of recognizing God's power demonstrated through Elijah, she became even more furious and determined to destroy him. Every divine warning only increased her rebellion and thirst for revenge. This is a striking characteristic of narcissism. They are incapable of accepting responsibility or recognizing when they are wrong. There is always a scapegoat. There is always someone to blame for their problems. Dyer used to say that when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. But the narcissist is incapable of this change of perspective. They are trapped in a bubble of self-deception that prevents them from growing spiritually. And it's exactly at this point that God's patience reaches its limit. When warnings are consistently ignored, when mercy is repeatedly scorned, something terrible happens in the spiritual realm. God changes his strategy from mercy to justice. And when that happens, there is a specific moment in every narcissist's life when God simply says, "Enough." It's as if an invisible door definitively closes in the spiritual realm, and from that point on, there is no turning back. The Bible tells us that God will not be mocked forever. There is a limit to his patience, especially when it comes to people who deliberately cause suffering to others and refuse to change. With Jezebel, that point came when she directly threatened the life of the prophet Elijah. It was as if she had crossed a red line in God's heart. From that moment on, her fate was sealed. You can identify when this point of no return is reached in a narcissist's life by observing some revealing signs. Things begin to crumble in an accelerated and irreversible way. It's no longer just natural consequences. It's clearly divine intervention. The narcissist may even perceive that something is wrong, but their arrogance prevents them from making the correct connection. They blame bad luck, conspiracy, envy from others, anything except recognizing that they are reaping what they sowed. It's important to understand that God doesn't make this decision with pleasure. The Bible tells us that he takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but prefers that they repent and live. Every ignored warning, every wasted opportunity for change saddens the divine heart. But when someone consistently chooses the path of destruction, when they become a constant source of pain and trauma for others, God eventually honors that choice definitively. The narcissist becomes delivered to their own mental and emotional degradation. It's as if God removed his protection and allowed the natural consequences of destructive behavior to freely follow their course. Dyer taught us about the law of attraction, that we attract into our lives what we consistently focus on. The narcissist, obsessively focused on themselves, ends up attracting a deep emptiness that no external supply can fill. They begin to experience an insatiable spiritual hunger, a thirst that no praise, achievement, or manipulation can quench. It's the beginning of the inner torment that will become their constant companion. And then the first visible signs of divine justice in action begin. When God decides to directly intervene in a narcissist's life, the first signs are subtle but devastatingly effective. It's as if the universe itself begins to conspire against that person. Narcissistic supply, that energy they constantly drain from others, begins to mysteriously dry up. People who previously tolerated their abusive behavior simply lose patience and distance themselves. Relationships that seemed solid crumble without apparent explanation. Jezebel experienced this when she realized her influence was diminishing. People began to question her decisions, to resist her manipulations. It was as if a fog had lifted from everyone's eyes around her. The narcissist in your life may be going through something similar at this very moment. Notice if they are losing allies, if people are beginning to see through their masks, if opportunities are closing inexplicably. One of the most revealing signs is that they begin to work harder and harder to get the same amount of attention and validation. Before they could manipulate easily, now they need to work twice as hard for smaller results. It's as if God were gradually removing the supernatural ability they had to enchant and delude people. The charm that worked so well in the past now sounds false and forced to others' ears. They may begin to make increasingly desperate and self-destructive choices. The compulsive need to maintain their grandiose image leads them to greater risks and more visible mistakes. Internally, they begin to experience constant anxiety they can't explain. It's as if something invisible were disturbing their inner peace, because it is. It's God's very presence creating discomfort in a soul that chose rebellion. Wayne Dyer always talked about how our outer world reflects our inner state. For the narcissist, internal chaos begins to manifest visibly in their external life. Problems multiply, conflicts arise from nowhere, life becomes a constant battle, but they still don't understand what's happening. They still believe they can reverse the situation with more manipulation, more charm, more control. They don't realize they've entered a battle they cannot win, a battle against God himself. And then comes the most devastating phase of all. The most brutal strategy God uses against an impenitent narcissist is progressive isolation. It's as if he were removing, one by one, all the people who served as an audience for the narcissistic theater. Remember, the narcissist desperately needs an audience. Without people to impress, manipulate, and drain energy from, they literally wither like a plant without water. That's why isolation is so devastating for them. Jezebel experienced this dramatically. Slowly, everyone around her began to see her true nature. The very servants who once feared her began to question her authority. It was as if God were removing scales from everyone's eyes. The same happens today. You may be seeing this happen with the narcissist in your life. People who once defended them begin to ask uncomfortable questions. Family members lose patience. Friends distance themselves without giving clear explanations. It's important to understand that this is not coincidence or bad luck. It's direct divine intervention. God is systematically removing all sources of narcissistic supply from that person. What's most interesting is that the more isolated they become, the more desperate they become. And desperate people make even more destructive choices. It's a vicious cycle that accelerates their own downfall. They may try to compensate for the loss of supply by becoming even more dramatic, more extreme in their behavior. But this only serves to scare even more people around them, creating even more isolation. Wayne Dyer used to teach that when we are aligned with our divine source, we attract healthy and loving relationships. The narcissist, disconnected from God by their own choice, attracts increasingly relational chaos. They begin to realize that their manipulative tactics don't work like they used to. Gaslighting doesn't stick, lies are quickly discovered, dramas don't generate the expected sympathy. It's at this moment that many narcissists enter real panic. They feel control slipping through their fingers and can't understand why. After all, they always managed to manipulate people before. What changed? What changed is that God decided to intervene. And when the creator of the universe decides that someone needs to learn a lesson, there is no manipulative strategy that can resist that power. But isolation is just the beginning. The next phase of divine justice is even more intense. The cruelest punishment God applies to a narcissist is not external, it's internal. It's allowing them to experience the absolute emptiness they always tried to hide behind their grandiose masks. Imagine waking up every day with an insatiable thirst that can never be satisfied, an emotional hunger that physically hurts, but that no amount of praise, achievements, or attention can satisfy. This is the torment that God allows the impenitent narcissist to experience. Jezebel probably lived her last years in this inner agony. No matter how much she tried to maintain her facade of power and control, internally she was disintegrating. The human soul was not created to function disconnected from God, and when this happens, suffering is inevitable. The narcissist begins to experience perpetual dissatisfaction that corrodes them from within. Nothing they conquer brings lasting joy. Every victory becomes empty within hours or days. It's as if they had permanently lost the ability to feel genuine contentment. This is one of the most sophisticated forms of divine justice, not destroying the narcissist externally, but allowing them to live in a constant state of inner torment. It's almost as if God said, "You chose to live separated from me, so experience what that separation is like." Wayne Dyer always taught that true happiness comes from our connection with the divine source within us. When we cut that connection through pride and selfishness, we create our own particular hell. The narcissist becomes a prisoner of their own mind. Obsessions, anxieties, paranoids begin to dominate them. They may develop increasingly destructive addictions in desperate attempts to fill the inner void. What's even more cruel is that they begin to realize that all their relationships are superficial. No one really loves them. They just tolerated or feared them. This realization is like a dagger in the heart of any human being, even a narcissist. They realize they built their entire identity on false foundations. The grandiose persona they presented to the world was just an illusion, and now that illusion is unraveling before their eyes. It's at this moment that many narcissists begin to experience episodes of emotional collapse. The reality of their spiritual condition finally penetrates through all their psychological defenses. But there's still one more phase in divine justice that needs to be fulfilled. There comes a moment when all the support structures of the narcissist's life simply collapse simultaneously. It's as if God removed all the pillars that sustained their false existence all at once. Jezebel experienced this literally and dramatically. Within hours, she lost her power, her influence, her security, and finally her own life. But the emotional and spiritual collapse had begun long before her physical death. For the modern narcissist, this collapse may not be as visually dramatic, but it's equally psychologically devastating. They may simultaneously lose their job, important relationships, health, reputation, and financial stability. The most terrible thing is that at this moment they finally realize that no one is going to save them. All the people they once manipulated now see them clearly for what they are. There is no longer a mask that can hide their true nature. It's as if God said, "You always wanted to be the center of the universe. Now you are completely alone in your particular universe of suffering." Wayne Dyer taught us that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but the narcissist, by consistently rejecting their spiritual nature, ends up becoming just a desperate ego with no connection to anything greater than themselves. In this phase, they may desperately try to reconquer people, reverse situations, regain lost control. But it's too late. The moment of grace has passed, and now only the consequences of their choices remain to be reaped. Many narcissists develop severe depression in this phase. Not from true repentance, but from the frustration of realizing they lost the game they thought they mastered. It's a type of selfish sadness, focused on their own pain and not on the evil they caused others. Some may even try to play victim at this moment, hoping to generate sympathy and reconquer narcissistic supply. But the people around them have already learned to recognize these manipulative tactics. The collapse is so complete that they may begin to question their own sanity. The reality they always denied or distorted now imposes itself with relentless force. It's impossible to continue living in fantasy when truth becomes undeniable. This is the point where some narcissists finally break enough to seek genuine help. But unfortunately, most simply sink deeper into their bitterness and denial. And then comes the final destiny. The final destiny of an impenitent narcissist is to live eternally imprisoned by their own destructive choices. It's as if they built their own emotional prison and threw away the key. Jezebel died alone, despised and forgotten. Her own servants betrayed her in the end, throwing her out the window to be devoured by dogs. There was no mourning, no lamentation for her death. She simply disappeared from history like a nightmare that finally ended. The modern narcissist may not have such a dramatic end, but experiences an equally devastating social and emotional death. They become irrelevant people in others' lives, remembered only for the trauma they caused. It's important to understand that this is not a destiny that God imposes with pleasure. It's simply the natural result of a lifetime of selfish and destructive choices. As Wayne Dyer said, our actions have inevitable consequences in the universe. The narcissist ages bitter, lonely, and full of resentment. They may even live comfortably in material terms, but internally they are emotional beggars, pleading for a crumb of genuine attention that never comes. Their last years are frequently marked by paranoia, depression, and a constant feeling that the world conspired against them. They never manage to make the connection between their behavior and their circumstances. The most tragic thing is that they completely lose the ability to experience genuine love. Even if someone tried to truly love them, they would be incapable of receiving or returning that love due to years of emotional hardening. They become slaves to their own bitterness, constantly reliving the offenses they believe they suffered, planning revenges that never materialize, blaming everyone except themselves for their misery. This is God's most perfect justice, allowing them to reap exactly what they sowed. A life of selfishness results in absolute solitude. A life of manipulation results in universal distrust. A life without love results in emotional emptiness. And while this happens to the narcissist, what happens to you who was a victim of their manipulations? How does God deal with those who suffered at the hands of these toxic people? The answer will surprise and comfort your heart. While the narcissist experiences the consequences of their choices, God has a completely different plan for you who suffered at their hands. Your story doesn't end in pain. It transforms into victory and restoration. The Bible promises us that God will transform into good everything that the enemy wanted to use for evil in our lives. Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every moment of mental confusion caused by the narcissist will be transformed into wisdom, strength, and purpose. Wayne Dyer always taught that our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts when we see them from the right perspective. Your experience with the narcissist, however painful it may have been, is molding you into a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person. God is restoring the years that were stolen from you. He is returning your self-esteem, your confidence, your ability to trust and love. It's a process, but it's real and happening at this very moment. You are learning to recognize toxic people before they cause damage. You are developing healthy boundaries you never had before. You are discovering your true identity beyond the lies the narcissist tried to plant in your mind. Every day that passes free from toxic influence is a day of healing and growth. You are rediscovering who you really are when you're not being constantly criticized, manipulated, or diminished. God has a special purpose for your pain. He is using your experience to enable you to help other people who are going through the same suffering. Your story becomes a beacon of hope for others who are still trapped in abusive relationships. Divine justice is not just about punishing the narcissist. It's about completely restoring their victims, and this restoration is even more beautiful because you now value peace, genuine love, and healthy relationships in a way you might never have valued before. You came out of the valley of shadows stronger, more aware, and more connected to God. The narcissist lost everything through their selfish choices, but you gained wisdom, spiritual maturity, and a renewed ability to love and be loved. This is true divine justice, not just the punishment of the wrongdoer, but the complete restoration of those who chose the path of light.